I have lived in Italy since the 1960s, really more than 50 years at this point, and I have never seen anything like the present situation. I have been present for the gradual growth of the mass tourist business. Year after year, we've seen ever more visitors, and suddenly, in a matter of few days, no one at all.
Florence is one of the world's most beautiful open-air museums. The birthplace of the Renaissance is home to timeless architecture and priceless works of art. But with coronavirus keeping tourists away, the city of Florence has a problem. Preserving history is not free. So what happens if nobody is around to pay for it?
These buildings and the masterpieces that they contain depend upon the continual flow of millions of tourists every year. The cathedral complex has 2.25 million visitors normally. Now we're down to 0. We are a private institution. We're not a state-owned entity. We receive no subsidies from outside sources. We live on the revenues from the tickets to the monuments and to the museum, and at present, for 2 months, there's been no revenue, and in all likelihood, there will not be much for the rest of this year and perhaps even for next year.
Translated into numbers, that's potentially just over 22 million euro, or around $25 million in lost revenue this year alone. Money that was used to pay for important restorations like the baptistry of St. John. And this is only one of many landmarks in Florence whose preservation had to be stopped.
One of our main tasks, which is the maintenance of these buildings, is simply on hold. If a hole were to develop into the roof of the cathedral, and occasionally that happens, we are in difficulty to call in workmen to repair it. We don't have the money to face the extremely complicated and specialized maintenance of historic buildings like this.
The sudden drop in tourists means long queues in front of museums have become history. But with the consequent loss in revenue, is history itself paying the ultimate price? In a way, there is a silver lining in the desertification of Florence. For instance, to get into popular museums like the Uffizi Gallery won't be so difficult anymore. Before coronavirus, more than 2 million people visited this maze of masterpieces every year. But these days, there seem to be more statues than people. Only half of the people who were allowed in the museum on a daily basis can enter the Uffizi these days, and the more distant they are socially, the closer they are to masterpieces.
Coming to the Uffizi now in those first months after the reopening will be such a unique experience because you won't have the crowds around. You can really concentrate on the works of art. You actually do get far more for your money than you got before. You might actually be alone for 5 minutes or 10 minutes with Botticelli's Venus in one gallery, and that's going to be something that you can tell your grandchildren about.
Another masterpiece visitors will likely face is Caravaggio's Medusa. In Greek mythology, those who gazed into her eyes will turn to stone. But these days, onlookers could be petrified for a more subtle reason.
It is perhaps no coincidence that this round shape, together with the wild hair of Medusa, does resemble structurally to the virus. She was painted to be scary. She looks even scarier now.
As legend goes, in the end, Medusa was defeated. Coronavirus, on the contrary, will likely scare people away from Florence as from other major tourist destinations for months to come. If it's true that history repeats itself, Florence will come out of this pandemic more beautiful than ever. Back in the 14th century, the plague ravaged the city, and yet it gave rise to the Renaissance, one of the greatest revivals in arts, architecture and literature in human history. Back then, the rebirth of Florence was financed by the Medici, the city's most powerful family. These days, at least some of the restoration is paid for by art patrons who are not from Florence, Italy, or even Europe. For more than 20 years, the non-profit organization Friends of Florence has given American philanthropists the choice of a masterpiece that needs restoration. By paying for it at a time when restorations are on hold because of the shortage of income from tourists, they become a lot more than friends of this city. They are saviors of its artistic heritage.
We can find funding because people really feel that Florence, what it has given to the Western civilization is part of their heritage, which it is. So that is the reason why we've been able to fund project after project. The David by Michelangelo, the entire Loggia dei Lanzi on Piazza della Signoria, and it goes on and on and on.
The latest project funded by Friends of Florence is the Pietà of Michelangelo. But with so many other restorations on hold because of the disappearance of paying crowds, could crowdfunding be a solution? Everyone, not just wealthy benefactors, can pitch in and become part of the new Renaissance.
I believe that Florence does need a new Renaissance. In this time, though, instead of the Medici and the larger families, it's the world who can fund important projects, smaller and larger treasures for the city of Florence.
If your wife, if your mother, if your daughter or son, who perhaps has studied here, is having a birthday or simply wants to feel in touch with Florence, make a gift of this. Make them become part of keeping the Renaissance alive, because if we can't carry our restoration and maintenance work forward, all of this will lose its luster and many works indeed will be damaged.
As the sun sets over the lockdown, Florence will now hope that the world will come to its rescue and help the city preserve its history for future generations.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.